Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking a stack of really powerful sources that aim to fundamentally re-engineer how you think about stress.
And overwhelm and emotional volatility.
Right. We're diving into a conflict that I think pretty much everyone experiences. It's that gut-wrenching feeling of personal failure when you're triggered or overwhelmed.
In a way that feels just childish.
Yes, illogical or just plain messy.
It's that moment when, intellectually, you should be handling a simple conflict like a demanding email or a minor criticism as the fully functional adult you are. But instead, it feels like your whole internal operating system has been hijacked.
Completely hijacked. You might feel frozen or intensely angry, or you just sink into this abyss of shame that feels so out of proportion to what actually happened.
Utterly disproportionate.
And the cultural default, the story we're all taught to tell ourselves,
Yeah.
is that this is a character flaw.
Right. It's weakness, immaturity,
Yeah.
a lack of resilience that you just need to fix with, sheer willpower.
But our sources today offer a radical and frankly, a deeply compassionate reframing of that.
They argue that these complex behaviors, these emotional responses, they aren't evidence of pathology or failure. Instead, they are history, design, and survival.
History, design, and survival. I like that.
They're functional memory strategies activated at, incredible speed.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission here is to synthesize the science and the sociological critique in these sources to show you that your strong responses aren't random deficits. They are logical, historical mechanisms.
We're really going against the grain of self-blame.
We are. And to do that, we have to start with this foundational insight that kind of makes everything else just click into place.
We have to immediately establish a new timeline for understanding these reactions. If you feel like your behavior is suddenly inexplicable, it's probably because you've been time-traveled.
That's the key. The sources introduce this powerful aha moment. It's drawn from a therapist's observation that just perfectly recontextualizes the chaos.
It's so simple but so profound.
It is. The quote is, "When your trauma gets triggered, you don't act your age. You act the age the wound was created." And the source adds the follow-up. And suddenly, everything makes sense.
Just think about the immense emotional work that one quote does.
Oh, it's huge.
It means that the shame you feel when you overreact it's misplaced. You aren't failing as the adult you are today. You are operating on the emotional logic and the survival strategies of your younger self.
The 7-year-old or the 12-year-old.
Exactly. The one who experienced the original threat or wound or abandonment.
I think this provides such instant clarity for you, the listener. Suddenly, you understand why that relatively minor criticism from a boss sends you spiraling into a shame pit that feels completely unmanageable.
Right.
It's not some mysterious failure of adulthood. It's a perfectly logical, powerful response from a younger self whose world was actually threatened by rejection the first time around.
And what's so fascinating here is how this immediately shifts the focus. It moves from, an individual character deficiency, a lack in your ability to self-control, to an issue of historical context.
In functional memory.
Functional memory. The moment you accept you're operating from the emotional logic of a younger you, the behavior isn't baffling regression anymore. It's a perfectly logical, if outdated, reaction.
To an ancient threat being re-experienced in the present.
Yes. The source actually calls this operating within the age of the wound.
And understanding that concept is so essential because it's the complete opposite of the dominant story we all internalize. The sources call that standard story a small one, and it is cruel in its economy. This narrative reads dysregulation, whether you withdraw or you get volatile or you freeze, as a purely individual failure.
It's saying you have a personal deficit that needs to be corrected, usually through forced compliance. That whole narrative frames distress as a regression, as if you've just fallen backward on a ladder and need to try harder to climb back up.
But the core counter-thesis our sources are proposing is, well, it's far more empowering and contextual. So let's get to the heart of it. If it's not failure, what is it?
The core thesis is that distress isn't failure, it's memory under power.
Memory under power.
And this compels us to look beyond just, simplistic psychological diagnoses.
Yeah.
And consider the deep architecture of survival that we all carry.
Okay.
To really grasp this, the source gives us this powerful conceptual trifecta that defines the context. These three components explain how the body holds, processes, and activates that historical memory.
Okay, let's lay out that trifecta. Let's make sure we explain how these elements connect that history to the present moment. It starts with the mechanism of how the body physically holds on to the past.
Right, that's epigenetics.
Yeah.
This explains how our bodies remember history long after the event is over. A lot of people think trauma only lives in the brain as a story, as a narrative.
As something you think about.
Exactly. But epigenetics shows it's physical. Think of your DNA as computer hardware, your genes. Trauma doesn't change the hardware. It acts more like a software update. It changes the settings.
So it flips switches.
It flicks switches. It turns volume knobs up or down on how those genes express themselves. So the body literally gets wired for hypervigilance or shut down by physically altering the expression of those survival genes. The memory is in the wiring.
Wow. Okay, so that's how the body remembers. What's the second part?
The second is trauma itself, and this explains when the memory returns. It's the trigger mechanism. So when cues in your current environment, a tone of voice, a certain dynamic, a feeling of powerlessness.
When they match the pattern of the original threat.
That's it. That historical memory gets powered up, and the body reacts with full force, not to the present minor event, but to the historical magnitude of the past event.
It sounds like a rapid-fire threat assessment where the past context just completely overrides the present reality.
It absolutely does.
So what's the third component that frames all of this within survival?
That would be the PTMF connection, using insights from the power threat meaning framework. This is crucial because it explains why the body's specific responses, volatility, freezing, avoidance, why they made functional sense in the first place.
So it asks different questions.
Completely different questions. What power dynamics were in play? What was the threat? And what meaning did the person create to survive it? This framework helps us see that these behaviors weren't just random deficits. They were intelligent, immediate solutions.
Survival strategies designed to minimize threat in what was probably an impossible environment.
Precisely. And if we accept that distress is memory under power, then the task isn't to fix the memory or force it to be quiet. The task is to understand what powers it, why it was designed that way, and what conditions keep activating that threat system.
And that distinction, understanding the conditions versus fixing the person, that's the hinge for the entire critique here. Because the dominant cultural story, that cruel economy we mentioned, it demands something totally different.
It does. The overwhelmed individual is given a task framed as a personal moral obligation to grow up, calm down, self-regulate, and comply.
You have to shrink the reaction, silence the history, and just conform to the environment.
Regardless of how triggering that environment might be.
And this demand for immediate containment is what our sources identify as the legacy of psychiatric containment. This narrative, they point out, is never neutral. It's a political system.
It's designed to manage complex behavior without ever dealing with the complex, often toxic conditions that generate it.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because the system works through this two-stage mechanism of pathologizing behavior. It has to make the behavior about the person, not the environment.
It has to.
So walk us through those two stages.
Okay, first we have depoliticization. This just means stripping the behavior of its context.
Right.
So imagine a person reacting with intense anger to being belittled in a, let's say, highly abusive workplace. Depoliticization means we look at that volatile reaction and we completely forget to ask if they're in an environment that is constantly threatening their psychological safety or their livelihood.
You just strip away the influence of power.
You isolate the behavior from the conditions that created it.
Exactly.
And then comes the second stage, moralization. Once that behavior is floating free from its context, it can be framed as laziness or failure or a character deficiency, an internal flaw.
So now the person isn't reacting to abuse, they're just unprofessional.
Or too sensitive or lacking self-control.
And once the behavior is successfully moralized, the system achieves its critical goal.
Yes. The behavior can be punished or diagnosed or pathologized without ever investigating the external conditions that made the response necessary for survival in the first place.
The system successfully demands that the individual look inward, focus only on their own self-control, their own deficit, and ignore the environment that's re-triggering their historical wound.
That switch in focus is the whole game.
It is. We are taught to look relentlessly inward and ask, what is wrong with me? Why am I acting like a child? Instead of looking outward and asking, what conditions in this environment or what echo from the past created this defense?
And this whole setup forces us to ask the wrong question. Completely. The question we're taught to ask The one that maintains that cruel economy is so restrictive and shaming. It's, why can't you be normal? Why can't you cope?
That question is incredibly limiting. It assumes, first, that you are faulty, and second, that normal is both achievable and desirable in an environment that might be actively toxic.
Or threatening, or just constantly re-triggering that deep historical wound.
Yeah.
So the question the source suggests we should be asking is simply, what happened?
Just what happened?
Or maybe more completely, what conditions made this specific response necessary for survival in the past, and what is mirroring those conditions now? When you shift the discussion that way, the body's reactions, the volatility, the freezing, they stop being random deficits.
And they're revealed as products of a deeply intelligent history, a functional survival design.
That's it.
And the most hopeful takeaway from all of this source material really stems from that shift in focus. Because if the problem is historical design, not personal failure, then the solution lies in changing the environment.
The source offers a very clear conclusion here. Distress is not failure. And if you successfully change the conditions that mirror the original threat, then access, not pathology shifts.
Access, not pathology shifts.
Which means you don't have to spend years trying to force your younger self to act its age. You change the environment so the 7-year-old in you no longer believes it is actively under threat, and that is where real agency lies.
So what does this all mean? The core takeaway for you, the listener, is really a radical shift in self-perspective. The next time you find yourself in one of those moments of distress, feeling overwhelmed and incapable, just stop the self-blame.
Immediately.
Remember that powerful insight. You aren't failing as the adult you are now. You are operating on the survival logic of the younger self that experienced the original wound.
I think the most valuable shift we've talked about is moving away from self-blame and toward contextual analysis. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this kind of thinking offers, well, profound self-compassion. It transforms what feels like a character flaw into an intelligent, if maybe currently overactive, defense mechanism.
The goal is to understand the historical design of your responses. It provides the blueprint for true, sustainable regulation. It's not about forcing yourself to breathe deep in a toxic room. It's about leaving or changing the toxic room.
Exactly. The whole discussion centered on changing the question from, why can't you be normal, to what happened. So here's something for you to mull over. If we accept that distress is memory under power, what specific conditions in your life, and these could be internal relationship patterns you've inherited, or external demands at work or home, what conditions need to be identified and changed to shift from what's currently labeled as pathology back to functional access?
Focus on the conditions that power the memory.
Not the character that carries the response.